My name is Jessica Parker, and I just turned 28. I should have been celebrating my promotion to senior marketing manager, the culmination of 5 years of grinding through night classes while working full-time. Instead, I was sitting in my car outside another rehab facility, my hands shaking as I dialed my mom's number for the 4th time that week. Something inside me finally exploded after years of being told that loving my father meant sacrificing everything I had worked for. The call went straight to voicemail, just like it always did when Dad relapsed. "Sarah, honey, I know you're upset, but you know how your father gets. He needs us right now. Can you pick up his medication and maybe stay with him tonight? I have that church meeting I can't miss." I stared at my phone, remembering how just 2 days ago my Aunt Linda had cornered me at the grocery store, her voice dripping with judgment. "If you really loved your father, you'd quit that fancy job and take proper care of him. Family comes first, Sarah. Always." But where was Aunt Linda when I found Dad passed out in his own vomit at 3 in the morning? Where was Mom when I had to explain to my boss why I was missing another important client meeting? Where were all these people with their opinions when Dad hit rock bottom for the 7th time, and I was the only one there to pull him back up? I used to believe them. I used to think that love meant erasing yourself completely, that being a good daughter meant setting myself on fire to keep everyone else warm. But sitting in that parking lot, looking at yet another treatment facility that would drain my savings account, I realized something that would change everything. They were never there when it mattered most. Growing up in small-town Ohio, the Mitchell family looked perfect from the outside. Dad worked at the steel mill for 23 years, Mom taught 2nd grade at the local elementary school, and I was the straight-A student who never caused trouble. We lived in a modest 2-story house with a white picket fence that Dad painted every spring without fail. But perfection was our family's biggest lie. Dad's drinking started gradually, weekend beers after work that slowly became daily necessities. Mom developed an impressive ability to pretend everything was normal, creating elaborate excuses for Dad's absences from school events and family gatherings. I learned early that my job was to be the responsible one, the one who held everything together while everyone else fell apart. My childhood was spent tiptoeing around Dad's moods, reading the temperature of the house the moment I walked through the door. Good days meant laughter and homework help at the kitchen table. Bad days meant hiding in my room while Mom made phone calls explaining why Dad wouldn't be at work tomorrow. I became an expert at making myself invisible, at being the daughter who never needed anything because everyone else needed so much. The turning point came when I was 16 and Dad lost his job at the mill. The drinking went from being a problem to being our entire reality. Mom took on extra tutoring jobs to pay the bills, and I started working weekends at the local diner to help with groceries. That's when the extended family started offering their unsolicited advice about what a loving daughter should do. The pattern began innocently enough with small favors. "Sarah, could you drive your father to his doctor's appointment? I have parent conferences all day." "Sarah, your dad forgot his lunch again. Could you drop it off at the temp agency?" These requests felt normal, even loving. I was helping my family, being responsible, doing what good daughters do. But the requests grew larger and more frequent. When Dad got his DUI, I was the one who had to leave my college chemistry lab to pick him up from jail. When he missed rent payments, I was expected to cover the difference from my part-time job earnings. When he needed someone to sit with him during his withdrawal symptoms, I was the one who canceled dates, study sessions, and eventually entire semesters. The family normalized this dysfunction with religious fervor. Every sacrifice I made was praised as virtuous. Every boundary I tried to set was condemned as selfish. Cousin Mark would pat my shoulder at family gatherings and say, "You're such a saint, Sarah. Not everyone would do what you do for their father." Aunt Linda would nod approvingly and add, "That's what real love looks like. Putting family before yourself." The most dangerous part was how gradually I lost myself in this role. I stopped making plans because they could always be interrupted by a family crisis. I stopped pursuing relationships because nobody wanted to date someone whose father might call drunk and suicidal at any moment. I stopped dreaming big dreams because I had convinced myself that my purpose in life was to be available for everyone else's emergencies. The signals were there all along, screaming at me to save myself. My college advisor asking why my grades had dropped. My best friend Emma pointing out that I hadn't been myself in years. My body breaking down from stress, my bank account emptying faster than I could fill it, my career prospects dimming because I was always distracted by family drama. But I had been trained to ignore these signals, to see them as evidence of my selfishness rather than signs that something was desperately wrong. The first time I realized how deep I was drowning was during my senior year of college. Dad had been sober for 6 months, and I foolishly allowed myself to believe we had turned a corner. I had finally started dating someone seriously, a pre-med student named Jake, who made me laugh for the first time in years. We were planning a weekend trip to Chicago when Dad relapsed spectacularly, disappearing for 3 days before turning up at a casino 2 hours away with no memory of how he got there. "Sarah, thank God you answered." Mom's voice was panicked on the phone. "Your father is at St. Mary's Hospital. They found him unconscious in the parking garage. Can you come? I don't know what to do." I looked at Jake packing our weekend bags, saw the disappointment in his eyes as I explained that I had to go. "This always happens," he said quietly, and I knew he wasn't just talking about this weekend. He was right. 3 months later, he broke up with me, exhausted by dating someone who was never fully present. The financial drain became catastrophic. In 2 years, I spent over $15,000 of my own money on Dad's treatment, medication, legal fees, and basic living expenses when he couldn't work. I calculated once that I had paid for rehab 3 times, bail twice, and covered his rent for a total of 8 months. Meanwhile, I was living on ramen noodles and working 2 jobs to afford my own student loans. The worst part was the isolation. Friends stopped inviting me places because I canceled so often. Emma tried for years to maintain our friendship, but even she eventually got tired of conversations that were always about my family crisis of the week. "I love you, Sarah," she said during our last real heart-to-heart, "but I feel like I'm talking to a ghost. When was the last time you told me about something you wanted, something that made you happy, something that wasn't about saving your dad?" At work, I developed a reputation as unreliable despite being one of the most talented employees in my department. My supervisor, Mr. Roberts, called me into his office after I missed my 3rd presentation due to a family emergency. "Sarah, you're incredibly gifted, but talent means nothing if you can't show up consistently. I want to promote you, but I need to know you'll be here when we need you." I promised I would be different, but we both knew it was a lie. The family's response to my struggles was always the same. More guilt, more expectations, more reminders of my duty. When I mentioned feeling overwhelmed, Mom would sigh and say, "We're all doing our best, honey. Family is all we have." When I suggested Dad needed professional help beyond what I could provide, Aunt Linda would lecture me about enabling versus loving. "Real love is uncomfortable, Sarah. It means doing the hard things even when they hurt." The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning in March. I had been promoted to senior marketing manager the day before, an achievement I had worked toward for 5 years. I was finally seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, imagining a life where I could focus on my own goals for once. The celebration dinner with my colleagues had been the first purely happy moment I'd experienced in months. Then my phone rang at 5:47 a.m. Dad had been found unconscious behind a bar downtown, and this time his blood alcohol level was so high the doctors said he was lucky to be alive. Mom was hysterical, and somehow the responsibility of handling everything fell to me again. I called in sick to work, spent the day navigating hospital bureaucracy, and used my credit card to pay for another treatment program Dad swore he was ready for. That evening, exhausted and emotionally drained, I sat in my apartment staring at the congratulations card my team had given me for my promotion. That's when Mom called with her latest request. "Sarah, your father really needs someone to stay with him for the next few weeks while he gets back on his feet. I know you just got promoted, but this is more important. Family comes first." Something inside me snapped. For the first time in my adult life, I said exactly what I was thinking. "No, Mom. I'm not doing this anymore. I've given Dad everything I have for 10 years, and he's no better. In fact, he's worse because he knows someone will always clean up his mess. I got promoted yesterday, the biggest achievement of my career, and instead of celebrating, I'm sitting here planning how to rearrange my life around Dad's latest crisis. I'm done." The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. When Mom finally spoke, her voice was cold. "I can't believe how selfish you've become, Sarah. This isn't the daughter I raised. Your father is sick and sick people need care. If you won't help him, I don't know what kind of person you really are." I hung up on my mother for the first time in my life and immediately called Emma. Through tears, I told her everything I had been holding back for years. She listened without judgment and then said something that would become my new mantra. "Sarah, you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, and you're allowed to save yourself." The next morning, I made 3 phone calls that changed everything. First, I contacted a therapist who specialized in families affected by addiction. Second, I called a lawyer to understand my legal obligations to my father, which turned out to be absolutely none. Third, I scheduled a meeting with my supervisor to discuss my new boundaries around personal emergencies. I wrote a letter to my family explaining my new position. I would no longer provide financial support for Dad's addiction-related expenses. I would not cancel work commitments for non-life-threatening family drama. I would not serve as Dad's primary caretaker or crisis manager. I offered to help him find professional resources and support his recovery efforts, but I would not continue sacrificing my own stability for his instability. The family's reaction was swift and brutal. Mom accused me of abandoning Dad in his hour of need. Aunt Linda called me heartless and selfish. Cousin Mark suggested I was having some kind of breakdown. The consensus was clear. I had failed as a daughter, and they would make sure I knew it. The first few months were the hardest I had ever experienced. Dad called me constantly, sometimes drunk and angry, sometimes sober and pleading. Mom alternated between the silent treatment and emotional manipulation. The extended family launched a campaign to convince me to return to my old role as the family's savior. But something remarkable happened during this time. I started remembering who I was before I became defined by everyone else's needs. At work, my performance improved dramatically. Without constant family crises interrupting my focus, I excelled in my new position and earned the respect of colleagues who had previously seen me as unreliable. I started dating again, slowly learning how to be in a relationship where I wasn't constantly distracted by family emergencies. I reconnected with Emma and made new friends who knew me as Sarah the marketing professional, not Sarah the daughter with the alcoholic father. Most surprisingly, removing myself from the cycle of enabling actually helped Dad in ways that years of my sacrifices never had. Without me as a safety net, he was forced to face the real consequences of his choices. He spent a month homeless before finally accepting a bed at a long-term residential treatment facility. For the first time, he completed the full program because no one was there to rescue him when it got difficult. After 8 months of my new boundaries, Dad called me from his sober living house. He was 6 months clean and working as a maintenance supervisor at the facility. "Sarah," he said, his voice clearer than I had heard it in years, "I owe you an apology. I used your love as a weapon against you. I let you sacrifice your life because it was easier than doing the work myself. I'm proud of you for walking away. It saved both of us." The family dynamics shifted slowly but significantly. Mom eventually started attending Al-Anon meetings and began to understand her own role in the dysfunction. Aunt Linda never apologized, but she stopped offering unsolicited advice about my choices. Some family relationships didn't survive my boundary setting, and I learned that was okay. The people who truly loved me supported my decision to prioritize my own well-being. Today, 2 years later, I'm engaged to someone who has never known me as anything other than a strong, independent woman with healthy boundaries. Dad has been sober for 18 months, and we have a relationship based on mutual respect rather than codependency. Mom and I talk regularly, and our conversations are about our lives, not crisis management. The most important lesson I learned is that love without boundaries isn't love at all, it's enabling. The people who told me that loving my father meant sacrificing everything were wrong. Real love sometimes means stepping back and allowing people to face the consequences of their choices. Real love means taking care of yourself so you can show up as your best self for others. If you're reading this story and seeing yourself in it, please know that you are not responsible for saving everyone else. You are not selfish for wanting your own life. You are not heartless for setting boundaries. The people who truly love you will support your growth, not demand your sacrifice. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop rescuing them and start believing they can rescue themselves.